It's Monday, September 23rd, and I'm your host, Paula Hersey. On today's show, we check in with our representatives on Beacon Hill. Now for a look at municipal and legislative notes. The Board of Health will hold a workshop regarding adult-only retail tobacco stores on Wednesday, October 16th at 4 p.m. at the Town Hall in the second floor hearing room. The discussion topics will include design standards, other products which may or may not be sold, discussion of whether or not to establish a permit cap. Bob Collette, Director of the Cape Cod Regional Tobacco Control Program, will be present at the workshop. This workshop is open to the public. Topics also include suggestions regarding design and construction requirements of adult-only tobacco retail stores wherever flavored tobacco products are sold, including nicotine products used in electronic devices and vaping devices. Also to be discussed will be the types of products which may or may not be sold at adult-only tobacco retail stores. Also open for discussion will be whether or not to establish an adult-only tobacco retail store permit cap within the town of Barnstable. The Board of Health encourages public participation. Senator Julian Cyr joins us in studio with news about additional funds for education coming to the Cape and Islands. Beacon Hill is back in session, and it's a full slate of activities for September and October. With me today, Senator Julian Cyr. So much going on, right?
Absolutely. First of all, happy local summer.
I know,
It's
right?
still, we just had a beautiful weekend, yeah, gosh, just enjoy every bit of it. But we're back in session, and big things are happening. So I sit on the Education Committee. I'm the only member of the Cape and Islands delegation on that committee. We've been working for months on a compromise looking at the Chapter 70 funding formula. This is how the state funds public education, K through 12 education. There was something several years ago called the Foundation Budget Review Commission. Foundation budget's essentially how we calculate who gets what. There was a series of recommendations, and that has prompted us to do work on this piece of legislation, which is arguably the most significant we've seen since the early 90s when education reform was passed. For me, as someone, actually, I was a product of that education reform. I was going through elementary school and middle and high school when we made those investments. So here's what this is. This is a $1.4 billion investment in K through 12 public education over the next 7 years. We are fully funding the Foundation Budget Review Commission's recommendations. So this is around supports for healthcare costs, English language learners, special education costs, other liabilities that school districts have. But we actually are going further. And we're starting with supports for low-income students. Under the old plan, students were only counted as low income up to 130% of the federal poverty limit, or poverty level, excuse me. Under this bill, we go to 180%. We very much increase the supports for English language learning students, and we make sure the incentives start. Currently, if you are an English language student, we give you more money if you're an English language student who's in elementary school versus someone who's in high school. If you're someone who's coming in and you're in first or second grade, you actually have the ability to learn language a lot quicker. Right. So we're inverting that. There's a whole host of things in here. I'm glad to walk you through more of it. Right. This means really big things, especially for the town of Barnstable, which has a number of low-income students and has a number of English language students. This is going to mean big things for Barnstable. We're probably going to see a pretty significant increase. We already saw a very significant increase in the FY20 budget for Barnstable, nearly an additional $1 million that came just to Barnstable because of these investments. This is going to be continuing. So the bill was put out from committee. We're going to be taking it up in the Senate in the coming weeks, and it means a whole host of big things.
Okay, so I know just from our conversations with the superintendent that English learners are actually the fastest growing segment, well over 10% in the town of Barnstable. And just one of our elementary schools, Hyannis West, has 40% of their population that are English learners. So when we talk about this as you know, per student, translate that into something that's tangible for the resident to understand that money. You can talk the dollars, but
Yeah.
we look at that. Is that more teachers? Is it more supplemental types of things, classes? Is it more textbooks?
Yeah. Well, we leave it up to the school districts largely how to make these investments. There are some important accountability metrics here, but we're not trying to actually add too many more requirements onto schools. I think the conventional wisdom, I think, is that we've gone too far in that. So yeah, it supports for, it's basically saying to the school districts, look, we know it's going to cost more money to educate someone who's an English language learner than not. We know that it actually costs more money to provide equitable education for low-income students than versus students who have more resources at home and in their community. So that's what we're trying to acknowledge here. It's going to mean a pretty significant increase for this town. It's going to mean a pretty significant increase for the Dennis-Yarmouth district as well, which they need some help as well. You know, and this is something we've been working on for months, actually. In the early summer, Superintendent Mayo Brown convened a group of educators and parents from across the region. We met at Barnstable High School talking about these issues. Senator Jason Lewis, who's the Senate chair of the Education Committee, came down, made a presentation, got a lot of feedback. But essentially what this bill is aiming to do is say, no matter where you live in the Commonwealth, you're going to have an equitable education, right? So whether you live you know, in Wellesley or in Chelsea, right, we're going to provide an equitable education. We're currently not doing that, and we're really leaving a lot of children behind, and that's the case here on Cape Cod as well. What this bill also does, a few other important things. The special education support is enhanced. Currently, there's something called the Special Education Circuit Breaker. This provides reimbursement up to 70% of special ed costs. It only included the instruction. It never included transportation. Under this bill, we include transportation. That is huge for Cape Towns. We also have a commission that looks at the needs of rural schools and school districts that have declining enrollment. That's not as big of a concern in Barnstable, but it's a big concern in my neck of the woods.
Sure.
On the Outer Cape, it's a big concern on the islands. And then we also are putting in place some new metrics to evaluate school districts, to make sure there's a little more accountability. And what I'm really excited about is there's also a pretty rapid study to really look at how the formula is calculated, how we calculate the local contribution, because the challenge we've always had is the current formula takes into account property values. Our property values are far inflated over what our income is, right? There's a disconnect there because of our second and third home market. So I'm excited for that part of this bill as well, because I think it'll further help Cape Cod get our fair share. But this is a very big deal, you know, $1.4 billion over the next 7 years. We also lift the cap for the Mass School Building Authority, which we've got important projects coming in the pipeline here in our communities for schools. That means more money for towns to either renovate schools or to build new schools. You know, public education, look, this is the best investment we can make. You know, I'm someone who's a product of an amazing public school education in K through 12, and I think I'm really proud to be part of this initiative and this process. We're going to take up this bill. It's going to pass. You know, we've got a little more negotiating to do, but it's a big deal, and it's going to really help some of the neediest families and kids on Cape Cod, and I'm really proud of that.
All right. So you also mentioned healthcare. Where does that fit in? Is that to maybe help towns with the rising costs? Because as everyone knows, that municipalities are facing that cost year in and year out of rising healthcare for their workforce.
Exactly. So the existing formula never took into account how astronomically quickly health insurance costs would rise. This is health insurance for workforce. So the bill does that. It actually is much more honest about the true cost to the district.
Okay.
There's also money in there to we expand the amount of resources that go to guidance counselors and social emotional learning and mental health. This is increasingly a really big need in our schools, and the formula currently just doesn't really account for that need. We're going to increase funding under this bill through that.
And social emotional learning, again, talking to Gina Hurley from the Barnstable School System, they're starting to get the data in. for this initiative of really taking children from, basically kindergarten right up through high school and having them understand the social part and the emotional part of growing and learning at the same time. It's a great, fantastic work.
Well, and it's essential, right? If you're
Right.
coming to school and you're dealing with a whole host of anxiety or depression or challenges or fears, just like you're not going to be able to learn well if you didn't have breakfast that morning.
Right.
If you're dealing with that stuff, you're not going to be as successful. And so I think I'm really proud that we're also looking at those issues too, because I think they really matter.
Okay. I know you have other things that are
Yeah.
definitely to talk about. We could talk about this all day, and maybe that'll be a long-form interview that we sit down and really
Yes,
once it's
sink our
passed.
teeth into this. We'll get the numbers. My sense is Barnstable is going to see a pretty significant increase in the reimbursement we receive, and that's going to mean really good things for folks here.
Fantastic. What else you got there?
So, really important. We always are talking about PFAS, and this, of course, is
All day long.
all day long, all day long PFAS. There is an effort underway. We have a supplemental budget in front of us that the governor filed. He proposes a number of investments
That's right.
financially in this. I'm supportive of that effort. And what we're trying to do is to take the bill on PFAS. I filed a bill with Representative Kate Hogan, who represents Stowe, sort of like central northern Massachusetts, to have a task force to us to really look at this issue. We're now trying to get that done in the supplemental budget.
Okay.
So stay tuned on that, but we're on PFAS. And then continuing the work, as you know, I'm the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Mental Health, Substance Abuse, and Recovery. We just had a hearing on highly addictive drugs and benzos, which is something there's a lot of concern about. We've had 2 hearings since Labor Day. We got a few more hearings coming up, trying to really advance that work. And then we're really trying to look more broadly at mental health. I don't call it a mental health system because I think we actually don't have a system implies a connectivity and coordination. We've got the component parts, and so we're trying to figure out, all right, how do you really transform mental health and make sure that there's true parity between medical, surgical care, and behavioral health, mental health. So more to come on that.
Okay.
And then just want to remind folks as well, we have had an ongoing public health. We've had an ongoing public health, I don't know if it's a crisis, but an issue of concern related to Eastern equine encephalitis, which we have been seeing here on Cape
Another one
Cod.
this past week in Mashpee.
I think 9 folks actually, unfortunately, have been infected with Tripoli in Massachusetts. The nights are getting colder, which is good. The risk is diminishing, but there still is risk. So really encourage folks to reach out to your local health department, take certain precautions. We're not out of the woods yet, but this is a significant issue, and one given the number of Tripoli positive mosquitoes we've seen on the Cape from Mashpee to Truro. Really urge people to be vigilant about this.
Right, and we know even from Gabrielle Sokolowski, who is the mosquito control here in the Barnstable County, just empty the standing water, folks.
Yeah.
It's really a little bit as simple as that, as if you have containers, your neighbors have containers, little pools. Nobody's in the pool. Well, they were in the pool this weekend, but maybe not for the rest of the week. But the
water's
the
still
kiddie
warm.
pools and things like that. Really, and be vigilant while you're out there. Wear protective sprays and clothing.
Fortunately, we're getting cooler nights, and that's going to help.
Right.
But we're not out of the woods yet.
Excellent.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Always a
Julian.
pleasure, Paula. Thank you.
Take care. Bills filed, budget supplemented, bridges named. All in a day's work for Representative Tim Whalen. He joined us in studio for an update. Everyone's back at Beacon Hill, and there's lots of work to be done. With me today, Representative Tim Whalen. Tim, welcome back to the show.
Paula, it's always so much fun to come here and see you, talk about what's going on at work, and my God, it's been a beautiful summer, hasn't it?
It really has.
Yeah.
Did you have a good one? Had some time to relax?
Had a great one. My wife and I got to spend some time together. Our kids who live off Cape, they came down to visit us, and a lot of time with the family, and family's everything.
Excellent, fantastic.
Thank you.
So you went right back to work. Lots of things happening, obviously, with budgets and bills being filed. Tell us what you're up to.
Sure. Just filed a bill yesterday. Talk about timeliness.
Sure.
And what this bill does is the intent of the bill is to enhance the penalties for people who attend protests and commit criminal acts while wearing a mask. This would be something like what we saw up in Boston a couple weeks ago when there were counter-protesters that were throwing rocks, they were attacking the police, and they were throwing bottles with liquids like human urine at the marchers and at the police officers and first responders who were there. I filed the bill on the House side. My good friend, Senator Dean Tran from Fitchburg, he filed it over on the Senate side. And like I said, it's brand new. Hit the press this morning. We filed it yesterday. We're expecting a lot of support. We've consulted with district attorneys. We've consulted with the Massachusetts Chiefs of Police Association and other groups who are involved in making sure that we're safe and ensuring the public safety to ensure that this is effective and, most importantly, that it's constitutional. So it's in the co-sponsorship period. I'd ask your viewers, if you want to reach out to your legislators and ask them if they would co-sponsor our bill, an act relative to public safety at public events. It would be very helpful to help us get this done. I think it's common sense legislation.
Right.
Keep people safe.
And let's talk a little bit. It's an enhancement to something that's already on the books, correct?
Well, what it is if you throw a rock at someone, there's already an offense for it. So what we're
Right.
doing is we're adding an additional fine that if you do that while masked at a public event, that there would be an enhanced penalty. And I believe off the top of my head, it's a $1,500 fine and up to 1 year in jail. Would be, there are different stages based upon the severity of the crime. And there's precedent for this, because already, having learned this from my years in police work, if you commit armed robbery while masked, there's an enhanced penalty for being masked while committing that armed robbery. So this is not virgin territory that we're entering here. There's already precedent for it in state law. And Senator Tran, who did an awful lot of work on this, him and his staff, they went and they researched like statutes in, I believe it was about a dozen other states. So
Okay.
I think that we're well grounded on this, and now we just need the support to try and get this done, and let's keep people safe.
Right. And I have one other question on that, too,
Sure.
with this particular bill. Is this for, obviously, to keep public safety officials safe, but is it for identity purposes as well, to actually prosecute them for the crime?
Yep, and
Okay.
that's exactly it. It's the idea that the Boston Herald, the day after the protests, interviewed one of the counter-protesters who stated that he was wearing a mask specifically so that he couldn't be identified for and be held accountable for the crimes that he was committing. When you give someone that sort of anonymity, I mean, the lid just gets blown off on the level of criminality and violence that they're willing to bring forth, and it results in injuries or worse, results in damage to innocent person's property. And let's face it, if you want to counter-protest, that's what the First Amendment's all about. Go out, speak your piece, and if you don't like what's being said, speak your piece over here. But you don't have the right anywhere to attack someone or damage their property because you disagree with them. That's wrong all day long.
Right. Excellent. And then something that obviously is near and dear to our veterans community, there's a bridge naming.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that.
So there was a gentleman who was born in 1928 in Yarmouthport. He's a son of the Cape. His name was Ori Sampson. Corporal United States Army in 1952 while serving our great nation over in North Korea. His unit was overrun by Chinese troops, and he was never seen again. He was declared missing in 1952, and he was declared presumed dead, presumed KIA in 1953. So a number of folks from AMVETS Post 333, of which I'm a member, they came to me and they proposed the idea of naming the bicycle bridge in South Yarmouth, which it goes over Station Ave, naming it after Corporal Sampson. And when they came and they explained to me the story of Corporal Sampson, and he still has family that lives here locally on the Cape, it just seemed like the right thing to do. We can never forget the service of our great veterans and those who have fallen in the field of battle, and we certainly can't forget those whose remains were never brought home to their families. And this seemed to, it was a forgotten war, the Korean War. Our MIAs are too often forgotten. This is a way to bring that back out. Call attention to this brave man, Corporal Sampson's service on our behalf, his sacrifice, and let him and his family, let our veteran community know that, and those who are actively serving, that they will never be forgotten.
Right. And to name bridges like that, that actually is a bill filed to do that?
Yep, so we filed the bill about a month and a half ago, and we're just waiting for it. It was assigned to the Joint Committee on Transportation, and I have a number of good friends over there who I have really solid relationships with, built on trust, and I'm going to be lobbying them to see if we can get this scheduled for a hearing. We'll open up the invitation to the family members or members of the veterans community to come up and testify if they choose to, and we're going to hopefully get this thing done, and let's get this bridge named for a brave American who gave us all on the battlefield on our behalf.
All right, excellent. And then budget. It seems like being a municipal government, that's all we ever do is talk about budgets. Because the cycle even here at Town Hall, we're already into the 2021
Right.
budget, 2020. It's a never ending cycle, but we've passed the budget, but now there's a supplemental budget. Tell us a little bit about that.
The words of Roger Waters and Pink Floyd, money, 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 rings true. When you're in the government business, it's all about the money, and it's the people's money. It's not our money, it's the money, it's the hard-earned money from the taxpayers. So we have to manage it as best we can. And what's happened is, in FY19, the state just saw an awful lot, basically a windfall in taxes come in. The economy is booming. Because of that, the stock market's going great. Capital gains taxes, employment taxes, unemployment's down, everything's moving. The Commonwealth took in close to somewhere in the ballpark of $1 billion in additional revenue above and beyond what our initial revenue projections were for FY19. So we have a closeout budget that we're in the process of working on right now. The closeout budget, it's somewhere in the area of about $600 million, and about half of that or so is slated to go to the rainy day fund, which would get our rainy day fund north of $3 billion, or at $3 billion. That's going to be important to save money, to keep our bond rating as high as it is and keep it up there. That saves us a ton of money. There's also going to be some income tax deductions that we're proposing, that the governor's proposing going forward as well because of these revenues that are coming in. And I think the thing that he's proposing, which I strongly support, is that we would double the deduction for dependents from $1,000 per dependent to $2,000 for each dependent, so that we're getting tax relief for young families. That's where I think some of that money, I mean, we all remember when we had young families, I do too, and it's, they need that money. The other thing that we're looking to include in here as well, and you certainly can't count your chickens before they hatch, is we've taken information from all the towns that were affected by the tornadoes that came through to find out what the costs were to the municipalities. Barnstable, Yarmouth, Dennis, Harwich, Chatham, Mashpee, the Sheriff's Department, anybody who had any sort of a loss to their municipal budget. So we've compiled all that, we put it together in a spreadsheet, we provided it to House leadership, and also to House Ways and Means. I have to thank my good friend Representative Sarah Peak for a lot of that. Her and her office did a ton of the work putting this together. And we're going to be submitting as a Cape and Islands delegation an amendment to get 100% reimbursement to the cities and to the towns that are affected, and that will save some money for our local municipal taxpayers. That's what we get sent up there to do, and I'm glad that we're going to be able to get this done.
Right. So that particular piece is really important too, because it was not designated by the federal government as whatever they want to designate it as. It wasn't as big a tragedy as they thought it was, or something to that effect.
We needed to hit a $9.6 million mark. The mark that we hit was more 4.2, 4.4, somewhere in that window. The only thing too, though, is if we were reimbursed by FEMA, the municipalities would be reimbursed at 80%. We're setting it up so that the state will reimburse it 100%, so that the cleanup and the cost from the DPW, police, and fire overtime and everything else, that will be borne by the state. We did it for the Springfield area after the tornadoes that went through there. We did the same thing. We gave $10 million to the Merrimack Valley after the tragic gas explosions they had up there last year. And I feel very strongly that we will get this done, and the state will step up to make sure that our taxpayers aren't held liable for Mother Nature's fury that we experienced here.
Right, because that money's got to come from somewhere else.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Great work, Tim.
Thank you so much, Paula. It's always a pleasure to come in here and talk with you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up next, things to do, places to go, and people to meet. The Barnstable Adult Community Center introduces the Caregiver Series. This free series of presentations are designed to offer support and information to family caregivers in our community. Up first, Tuesday, September 24th from 10 to 11 a.m., the workshop, Is That Change in Behavior a Symptom of Underlying Pain? Just as all people do, a person with cognitive impairment feels pain. However, as the dementia disease process progresses, the person's language skills and ability to communicate may change. They may no longer be able to tell you how they are feeling, and this may cause their pain to go untreated. Very often, their behavior may change and they may become agitated, disrupted, or withdrawn. If the person you are caring for is having increasing difficulties with verbal communication, it is important to be aware of the nonverbal signs of distress. Please register by calling 508-862-4750. Comments, suggestions, accolades? Connect with us on Facebook, email us, or send us an old-fashioned note by carrier pigeon. Channel 18 works. For you. I'm Paula Hersey, and thank you for watching Barnstable Today.